Deep in the woods of rural Maine, there was an old house, abandoned and decaying, known to the locals as the Hollow Manor. It was a place of dark legends and whispered fears. People said it was haunted by the spirit of Abigail Hollow, a woman who had been wronged and died under mysterious circumstances many years ago. One chilly October night, three friends, Sarah, Mike and Emma, decided to explore the manor, hoping to debunk the supernatural tales. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they made their way through the dense forest, the trees casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. The manor loomed ahead, its windows like dark empty eyes watching them. As they approached the front door, it creaked open on its own. They exchanged nervous glances but stepped inside, their footsteps echoing on the dusty wooden floor. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic. The temperature dropped noticeably as they moved deeper into the house. In the dim light of their flashlights, they saw old decaying furniture and faded portraits of the Hollow family. The eyes in the portraits seemed to follow them as they moved. Sarah shivered and suggested they head upstairs, where Abigail's bedroom was rumored to be. The staircase groaned under their weight as they ascended, each step feeling like a march toward doom. They reached the top and found Abigail's room, the door slightly ajar. Inside, the room was eerily preserved, as if waiting for its occupant to return. A large ornate mirror stood in the corner, its glass cloudy and cracked. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the room, slamming the door shut behind them. They spun around, flashlights flickering, and saw words scrawled on the mirror in what looked like blood. "Leave now or suffer." Panic set in as they tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Mike, the strongest of the group, threw his weight against it, but it was as if an unseen force was holding it shut. Emma began to cry, fear taking over. Then a low guttural voice echoed through the room, whispering their names. They turned to see a ghostly figure of a woman in a tattered dress, her eyes hollow and empty, floating toward them. It was Abigail. Sarah tried to speak, to reason with the spirit, but Abigail's face twisted in rage. She screamed, a sound that pierced their very souls, and the room plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, Abigail was gone, but the room was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. Desperate, they turned to the mirror, hoping to find a way out. Instead, they saw their own reflections, distorted and twisted, as if something malevolent was staring back at them. The words on the mirror changed. "You are mine now." With a final, desperate effort, they managed to break down the door and fled the manor, running through the woods without looking back. They never spoke of what happened that night, but each of them was haunted by nightmares of Hollow Manor and the spirit of Abigail. Years later, the house still stands, a monument to the horrors within. And some say, on a cold October night, if you listen closely, you can still hear the screams of those who dared to enter the Hollow Manor. In a quiet village nestled deep in the woods, there stood an ancient wishing well. The villagers spoke of its power in hushed tones, passing down stories from generation to generation. It was said that the well could grant any wish, but at a terrible cost. One summer, a young woman named Clara moved to the village. She had heard the legends and was skeptical, dismissing them as mere superstitions. However, life had not been kind to Clara. She had lost her job, her home, and her family. Desperate for a change, she decided to test the well's power. One moonless night, Clara approached the well, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. She took a deep breath and whispered her wish, to be loved and never feel lonely again. She dropped a coin into the well, and its faint splash echoed in the stillness. Days passed, and Clara noticed changes in her life. She met a man named Thomas, who seemed to be everything she had ever wished for. They quickly fell in love, and for the first time in years, Clara felt truly happy. But as time went on, strange things began to happen. Clara would wake up in the middle of the night to find Thomas staring at her, his eyes wide and unblinking. When she asked him about it, he would laugh it off, saying he couldn't believe his luck in finding her. The villagers started to avoid Clara, whispering behind her back. She shrugged it off, thinking they were just jealous of her happiness. But then she began to notice other oddities. Thomas never seemed to eat, yet he never complained of hunger. He was always there, always watching, always smiling. One evening, Clara decided to confront him. "Thomas, something's not right. Why do you keep staring at me? Why don't you eat? Who are you really?" Thomas's smile faded, and for the first time, Clara saw something dark and twisted in his eyes. "You wished for love, Clara. You wished to never be lonely again. The well granted your wish." Clara's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Thomas's form began to shimmer and distort, his skin turning pale and translucent. "I am bound to you, Clara, forever. You will never be alone again." Clara backed away, horrified. This isn't what I wanted. Thomas's voice grew colder. The well grants wishes, but it takes what it wants in return. You wished for love and now you have it. But you will never have your freedom. As Thomas reached out to her, Clara fled from the house, running to the well. She begged and pleaded, but there was no answer. In her desperation, she threw another coin into the well, wishing to undo her first wish. The well remained silent. Clara returned to her home, but it was empty. Thomas was gone, yet his presence lingered, a shadow that followed her every move. She could feel his eyes on her, even when she was alone. The villagers shunned her completely, and she became an outcast. Years passed, and Clara grew old and frail, haunted by the spirit she had summoned. The well had given her what she wanted, but it had taken everything else. In the end, Clara realized the true cost of her wish, a lifetime of love, but an eternity of loneliness. In a small, forgotten town, there lived an eccentric old puppet maker named Mr. Harlow. His puppets were known throughout the region for their lifelike appearances, with eyes that seemed to follow you and expressions that could change with the light. One day, a young girl named Emily wandered into Mr. Harlow's shop, entranced by the dolls on display. She begged her mother to buy her one, but the price was far too high. Disappointed, Emily left, but the image of the perfect puppet stayed with her. That night, Emily dreamed of the puppet. It called to her in a voice both sweet and sinister, promising to be her friend forever if she just came back to the shop. The next day, unable to resist the pull, she returned to Mr. Harlow's shop alone. "Ah, Emily," Mr. Harlow said, smiling warmly. "I knew you would come back. You really like my puppets, don't you?" Emily nodded, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Well, how about I make a special one just for you? It won't cost a thing," he offered, his eyes gleaming with an odd light. Emily agreed, and Mr. Harlow led her to the back of his shop, where she saw his workshop for the first time. It was filled with unfinished puppets and strange, intricate tools. The air smelled of wood and something she couldn't quite place. "Sit here," he instructed, guiding her to a chair. "This won't take long." As Mr. Harlow began his work, Emily felt herself growing drowsy. She tried to keep her eyes open, but a heavy sleep overtook her. When she awoke, she found herself unable to move. Her limbs felt stiff, her joints creaking as she tried to shift. Panic set in as she realized she couldn't speak, her mouth frozen in a permanent, painted smile. She could see Mr. Harlow standing over her, a satisfied grin on his face. "Perfect," he murmured, placing her on a shelf among his other creations. "Just perfect?" Emily's heart raced as she took in her surroundings. She wasn't alone. The other puppets, the ones she had admired, had eyes that now looked back at her with a shared horror. She understood the source of the lifelike quality in Mr. Harlow's puppets. They were all like her, real people trapped in wooden bodies. Mr. Harlow stepped back, admiring his new creation. "Welcome to the collection, Emily. I hope you enjoy your new home." Years passed, and Mr. Harlow's shop continued to attract visitors, each marveling at the lifelike puppets. But no one ever noticed the silent pleas for help in their eyes, or the way their expressions seemed to shift in the flickering candlelight, desperate to escape their eternal prison.